So first off, I'd like to get know a little bit about you guys. So who here has already started a startup, already in the middle of it? Anybody? One? Okay. Two? Who hopes to be doing a startup in the next 5 years? Okay, almost half the classroom. And maybe the next 10 years? And then who is here just because I heard there was some dessert afterwards? Okay, we got one. That's good. All right, so I know who we're talking to. So Tom explained a little bit about my background. I didn't leave college and jump right into my first startup, although my first startup was when I was in high school. I had a t-shirt printing business, I had a lawn mowing business, I had people that I had employed, and I knew that it was in my blood. I thrived for it. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, and I looked up to him a lot, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. But I fought the system. Like when I went to BYU, I majored in like 8 different things, from botany to pre-med to psychology to philosophy to physics. I had no idea what I really wanted to do. But I kept on fighting the system, and then finally it's like, oh geez, I should really just study marketing, because that's kind of what I enjoy, and I know I want to be in entrepreneurship in the long run. But after I got out, I went into consulting, went to the Bay Area. That was in '98, so there was a lot of high-tech buzz going on. And one of my roommates was a computer science major, and he said, hey, this is where the money is. I tried to get a job as a marketer, and they were paying like 20 grand, and I was like, I can't live on that. So I went into consulting, and that was a good place for me to springboard into getting an understanding of what parts of a company do I like. But I also found that I didn't like dropping into a project, knowing everything about it, and then having to leave the project and not seeing it go public or go live. So I then jumped into a couple startups in the Berkeley area. There were software companies, loved it. And then in the second startup, I came back here to Provo and was in this enterprise software company running the product side of things. And I thought, geez, I have no idea about the finance side of a company. I need to go get that. So that's when I decided to go get an MBA. And that was for me the way to do it, because it gave me that security blanket. It's not the way to do it. I see plenty of guys that just leave the undergrad, jump right into it. They feel comfortable, and that's the way to do it. That's where they feel comfortable. So along the way, guys, I have some little things from one of my startups I'm going to hand out for those who want to ask questions or get involved or can answer or answer questions. But the startup, this is the way I wanted to lead it, was something with Winston Churchill. A lot of my co-founders have always said I'm a pessimistic optimist. I really ask a lot of questions. I'm always kind of like negative, but in reality, I'm super optimistic. I always see the glass half full, and you kind of have to do that in order to get through. I talked a little bit about my history of education. My first startup was, he said 1440, it was Cafe Scribe. So I was living here in Provo, I was flying to New York and flying to Berkeley, and along the way for 2 years I carried a suitcase full of textbooks. This is in 2003. There were no textbooks you could download, you couldn't even get a PDF of the textbook, and I thought, this is a serious pain. It actually started a little bit different. My wife was one that said, you should really think about textbooks, and so she kind of put me on that textbook path, and I started doing research and found that they had a lot of pain. They're really expensive, they're really heavy, they were subpar, and iTunes had just been released a year before. And I thought to myself, what if I could take the iTunes concept and put all textbooks on it? So that was the crux of Cafe Scribe. And guys, this was a painful startup. I'd been married, I had kids, I had a mortgage, and I thought, gee, I should try to do this. So what did I do? I went out and I took $80,000 out of my mortgage. I ran a credit card bill up to $40,000, and I lived on $1,000 a month. It was super painful. I was, every time I went to New York to meet with McGraw-Hill or Pearson, I stayed in youth hostels, something that's very scary. It's like wickedly, I didn't like it. I felt like I walked out with fleas every time. But that was Cafe Scribe, and for 3 years went through that. Eventually was able to miraculously sell it off to the largest textbook distributor in the United States. But we got into this thing, there were some very dark days where, one day I had a term sheet to buy my company from Google, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and then on the day before Christmas, a term sheet is basically a sheet saying, we intend to buy you. The day before Christmas, I'm in the New York JFK airport, and I remember getting a phone call from my investment banker saying, Google's no longer going to buy you, Amazon has no interest, Barnes & Noble no wants to buy. And this was a big number. I was thinking Lamborghinis. I was all excited. And all of it just went puff. And so those are days you're going to go through where it gets really dark. And you think, okay, I have no money in the bank. All my prospects of who was going to buy me just disappeared. So that was Cafe Scribe. Eventually, we did recover from that. That was one of the days where we're going to talk about putting blinders on, and you kind of have to keep on going. Second one was Zarby. So eventually I did exit Cafe Scribe, sold it to a huge company, 10,000 employees, $4 billion company, and I had a clause where I had to work for them for 2 years. And it was painful. I was like corporate America. The day they bought us, 2 months later, the iPhone comes out, and I ran up to the CEO of the company. I'm like, we need to be on the iPhone with our textbooks. And he's like, you're crazy. Students don't read on they're never going to read on the iPhone. And I'm like, no, students are going to read on the iPhone. He's like, you're smoking crack. We're not going to do that. And so what did we missed an opportunity. Right when I got in, we had an opportunity to get on the iPhone, be the first textbook player there, and he wouldn't do it. And so I hated that environment. It drove me crazy. Everything was a red tape. It got frustrating. And so I started looking out and I started developing things in the evening. And then a friend of mine from like 20 years ago, during the BYU days, comes to me and said, hey, I sunk $100,000 into this company. It's a honey company that's doing cough syrup. It's going sideways. Can you come in and take a look at it? So I resisted for 3 months. I kept on saying no to him. And I looked at it some more. And what I didn't like about it was the market space. It was a small market. But then one day my kids get sick, and I gave them the Zarby's cough syrup, and they stopped coughing. And I'm like, wait a second, this is just honey. How's this working? And they stopped coughing, and I said, there's something here. Then I talked to my wife, and then I talked to some pharmacists and then some doctors and started doing some more research. I'm like, there might be something here. This company was about 8 months old at the time. It was at Harmon's and distributed at Harmon's only. Well, fast forward to now, it's now the second largest cough syrup in the nation. I'm stoked about it. I'm not running the company anymore, but I still am chairman, very much involved. And it wasn't that easy. There was a lot of hardships. I mean, there was days where we got into Walgreens and we're like, we got $1.5 million PO. We're going to be, I was like looking at the money, and then the next day, Walgreens sends me an email and they're like, oh, we decided to cancel you. You're no longer in Walgreens. And one of the co-founders is like, oh, Bryce, you can take your $500,000 that you just invested in out. And I'm like, these are the days that you have to sit there and you stick the $500,000 in, and you have to keep on going. You have to figure it out. And so those are those days that you kind of have to grind it out. So that was Zarby's, and now I'm doing Game It. So about 1.5 years ago, I was looking at, hey, there's something else that caught my eye, which was mobile gaming, and I thought we could create something really exciting. So I called up my lead architect at Cafe Scribe, who now lives in Texas, and I'm like, Tyler, this is my idea. I want to make a game where we can post a product about whatever product it is, and then people can play a trivia game. So you look on, you find a $200 gift card or a Fitbit, and then you choose a trivia topic of your liking, and sort of like fantasy football, rather than picking your team, you just play a trivia game, and if you're the fastest at that trivia game, you win the product. And then we went live, so you can download it only on the iPhone right now, and a year ago we went live. It was like 1.5 years ago we went live, and we stumbled. It was frustrating. We were getting poor reviews. We weren't finding a way to get to break even. We weren't making money. Nothing was coming together. And then finally I laid off a lot of staff. I went down and said, okay, we've got to figure out how to make this thing work. And that was in September. And there were some dark days, which I'm going to come back to. But so that's Game It. So very different industries, very different products, but in the end, it's a business. I have to make revenue, you have to make a margin, you have to make payroll, and figure that out. So as I was kind of thinking through what could I talk to you guys about, and I tried to distill 3 learnings that would be valuable for me if I were in your shoes thinking about doing a startup in 2 to 5 years. But before I get into those 3 things, I wanted to talk about a little bit of the life cycle of the startup. So I've kind of distilled it down to it's like having a baby. So you have this, if you're married, you're like, hey, honey, let's have a baby. I'm actually expecting my 5th right now, and so you're having this baby, and you're like, you get pregnant, and then you're like, the guy's like, holy crap, I'm having a baby. I have like no money, or I'm like trying to have to get a job, and then the wife starts puking all night long, and she's like uncomfortable. That is like that pregnancy phase where you have this idea, and you're kind of nurturing it along, but there's things like, how am I going to pay myself? How am I going to figure out how to pay a co-founder? How are we going to make ends meet? And that's that whole pregnancy side. Then the baby comes out and you're like, oh, he's so cute. No matter what he looks like or she looks like, she is super darling. And you're like, oh, he's so cute. We're teaching him how to learn, and you're all excited. And that's like the infancy stage of the startup. You take this baby out and you're like, okay, I'm going to go show him off. And you walk him out and you show him to investors, and he's like, he's missing an arm. He's freaking ugly. And you're like, oh, crap. They think he's ugly. And you have to go back and you have to regenerate and figure out, okay, how am I going to make this baby appealing? And so you work with them. Maybe you have to get them some tutoring, whatever that is. That's the toddler phase, which I just went through with Gaiman. I literally had this user interface. I was super excited. I thought it was the sexiest thing since sliced bread. Went to the Bay Area, and I got kicked in the face every single meeting. Who are you? This is ugly. This isn't working. And no one wanted to touch me with a 10-foot pole. So that was my infant stage. It happened with Zarbee's too, by the way. Zarbee's, I walked in and everybody's like, this is honey. I walk over 2 aisles and I can buy it for $1 and you're selling it for $9? How is this going to work? I got laughed out of so many rooms on Zarbee's. But finally I found someone that's they couldn't get enough of Zarbee's. They, like myself, had tried it on their kid and they're like, can I give you $10 million? And I was like, oh yeah, sure, that's awesome. And that became a very fun marriage. So that's the infant stage. Then I taught the toddler stage. So you get that money, and then you start growing that kid up, and then he starts drawing on the walls. And what I mean by drawing on the walls is you expected a 60% margin, and you're really getting a 20% margin. And you're like, oh, crap. This is not what my kid should be doing. He shouldn't be drawing on them all. How do we fix this? And so, you're in that toddler phase, but, eventually you figure that out. And then you go into the teen stage. And that's the stage where you're going from 4 people that's in your startup to you've got 15, 20, 30. And this is where you've got grumpy employees. You've got issues where employees are suing you or co-founders are suing you. And that's the teen stage. And that's also a bundle of fun. But eventually you start getting to a cadence where it's working. And then you get to this graduate level where your kid actually graduates. He gets bought. And then you're crying because he's leaving the house. You're an empty nester. You have what the heck? Because you've put so much into this. And then sometimes you graduate and then you have to be stuck with that kid because you're it's sort of your kid's going to college, but you're sitting in the room with him, and it's really uncomfortable because you're okay, I shouldn't be here. That's what happened to me with Follett. They bought me, and then for 2 years I'm stuck in the room, and I'm oh, this is uncomfortable. It's I loved the fact that I got some money for it, but I also kind of wanted to be done. So there's that whole phase. Any questions about that? Okay. So 3 things to help you succeed in this phase. So the first one is, my philosophy is you've got to be completely OCD about your startup. You can ask my wife. I wake up frequently at 1 a.m. and I'm like, oh, I've got an idea. And I'll go out and I cannot sleep. And I cannot sleep all night long. You've got to be so obsessed about it that that's all you're thinking about. You wake up, you're eating cereal. I don't know how many times my wife is talking to me and I'm sitting there eating. She's like, did you hear anything I just said to you? And that happens a lot because I'm constantly iterating in my head about something about the startup. So there's the obsession thing, and we're going to talk about that. Then there's strong support network. This is critical. There's so many dark days. You've got to have that strong support network, and then the high integrity, and I'll touch on the points on each of these. So the obsession. You have to be laser focused. You're completely focused on every element of it. So at the early stages, the pregnancy phase, you're thinking about the market space. How big is this market? Is it a $100 million market? Is it a $1 billion market? How am I going to get in there, and how am I going to be competitive? What's my angle? Those are all the things I'm looking at during the pregnancy stage, where I am obsessing about this company for about 8 to 10 months and figuring out my angle at interviewing. I personally like big markets. That was my anxiety with Zarbee's. Children's market is close to $1 billion in cough syrup. The adult market, though, is $3 billion. So I said, okay, if we can enter in the children's, we can expand to the adult market. So that's market size, market opportunity, your competitive advantage. What's the white space? What can we do that's different than everybody else? And that's also critical. I have this thing here with the blinders on. One of my advisors early on in my Cafe Scribe days said, Bryce, you've got to be like a horse with blinders on. Horses have peripheral vision. If they don't have those blinders, they get distracted and they look around. I have a friend who is He's running a seed company. That's the thing is, you can be obsessed about anything. I would never get totally obsessed about selling, pumpkin seeds. But my friend is obsessed about it. That's all he's talking about is selling seeds and different angles. He's got a greenhouse in his backyard. You can be obsessed about anything. A lot of people are like, how exciting is cough syrup? That's not very exciting. But believe me, I got super obsessed about it. That's all I thought about was cough syrup. I'd go to Switzerland and find what kind of cough syrups are they using in the natural space. And it's really exciting. Now I'm obsessed about gaming. That's all I do is I play different games. I look at different, and that's really a fun place to be obsessed. But these blinders are there for a moment. I was talking to a bunch of my entrepreneurial friends about, this teaching this class. And one of them said, you know what, one of my things that I made a mistake on my first startup was I wasn't totally obsessed with my first startup. I'd sit down at lunch with another entrepreneur. He'd start telling me about his thing. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I mean, that's the other thing common with entrepreneurs is they got severe ADHD, which I do have. And so any shiny bumper or any squirrel that's running around, you start looking at them and you're like, oh, I'm excited about that. And you want to invest in that or you want to put your resources behind that. I would strongly suggest that, being a serial entrepreneur is like you do one, you finish it up, you go to the next one. And then finally, as obsessed as you are, you have to get ready for pivoting. I've always kind of knocked it up to 3 different strong pivots. So you've got, with Cafe Scribe, my first pivot was we were going for the entire textbook space. And then I thought, oh, wait, we've got to actually find a vertical that we can be successful in. So we focused on just the legal textbooks. And we started dominating there. We're the only provider. And then we said, okay, we figured that out. Let's now expand onto the biology or the sciences. So figure out how you're going to pivot. I pivoted in every single one of mine at least 3 times. And these are the pivots that are 180 degrees. With Gameit, we started out as an advertising platform that was, we were selling to ad agencies. We are not doing that right now because it wasn't working. We couldn't pay the bills. So get ready to, as much as you have to be focused, you also have to be able to take, pull yourself up above and say, okay, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to look around and figure out what's not working. What do I need to tweak in order to make this thing work? Any questions on being obsessed? Nothing? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Is it pretty, you feel like it's pretty common to get super excited about one thing for, a few months and then wake up one morning and just completely forget it? How do you, I guess that's just going into being focused. After I sold Cafe Scribe, I wanted to make a dating app. And then I wanted to make and this was before there was a dating app. This was the first part of the, there was only 100 apps out there. Now there are 1 billion apps. And so I wanted to make this dating app. I'm glad I didn't do the dating app because I didn't have the idea of Tinder. Mine was very complex. And then I wanted to do, I had all sorts of crazy app ideas that I wanted to do. And then I wanted to do a payday loan. And so I had a lot of different things. And then it sooner or later filtered down to something that I was super excited about. Here's some cough drops. So any other questions? Okay, so who's seen this movie? All right, did you like it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is the best. So I just saw it on Friday. I randomly just decided to go. This is the best example of what it's like to be an entrepreneur. The real story in the movie, he's not staying in he sleeps in an insane asylum in order to now he's not insane, but he needed to have free board. And so he stayed in an insane asylum to do this. If you want to get a glimpse of what it's like to be an entrepreneur and to be obsessively obsessed, watch Eddie the Eagle, because that's what he does. And then go read about his because everything, I watched a bunch of videos after it, because this is exactly what it's like. This guy from an early age is like, I'm going to be an Olympian, at age 10. And he didn't care what Olympian, what event, he was going to be at the Olympics. So he's trying to run, he's got knee issues, he's kind of weird, he can't see, but he is like, Mom, I'm going to the Olympics. He's reading all these books, he can't put it down. And then finally he goes out and he sees, hey, the Brits, they don't have many skiers. So he started skiing, and then one of the guys, and everything's going against him. He makes the cut, and then they kick him off the team, and then he's like, crap, and everybody's saying no. And then there are days that he wanted to give up. And believe me, guys, every startup, there are days I want to give up. And I usually go home and cry on my wife's shoulder, and she's like, sucks to be you, but you'll figure it out. Is pretty much what she sums it up to.
But Eddie, he would go back to his mom, and his mom's like, do what you need to do. And then somehow he like pivots, and he's like, I'm going to go. There was no British long jumps that do the 90 meters, and so that's what he decided to do. And he's crazy. Like getting on one of those 90 meters and looking down, that's freaking nuts. And startups, you got to have a little brain damage. You got to want to get up there and go down that 90 meters to your death. And you're going to get beat up. Like if I took off this, you would see a lot of bruises because I've been bruised up a lot. You're constantly getting, the highs are incredibly high, but the lows are incredibly low. So totally recommend this movie. The other thing is key is win or lose, always aim high. Totally agree with that. You don't have to be Josh James. You don't have to be Mark Zuckerberg. You're going to find his loss was he got into the Olympics. He came in dead last. But guys, Calgary Olympics, guess who's remembered? That guy. Nobody else. The guy that got gold, no one knows who he is. He was remembered. But you know what? The other thing is he had a blast. He achieved his goal. So you may not make millions of dollars, which by and large, it won't make you happy. But along the way, you're going to find a lot of happiness. So that's my stick for that. So strong support network. This is also critical. So I'm a huge believer in co-founders. There are dark days. So let me just give an example. In December, my co-founder lives in Texas. We Skype like 8 to 10 times a day, or we're on the phone. I'm always talking to him. And he's the technical side. He's a computer science guy. And I'm trying to call him. I'm trying to Skype him. He's not picking up, which is abnormal because I usually can always reach him no matter what time of day. At 1 a.m. I've reached him. He's not answering anything. Finally, around 8 o'clock, I get a hold of him. I'm like, Tyler, dude, what's the deal? Where have you been? Because this guy never takes vacation either. I mean, if he's not coding, he's playing games. And so I'm like, Tyler, where have you been? And he's like, dude, truthfully, I've been curled up in a ball in the fetal position in my bed under the covers. I didn't have energy to turn on the TV. I couldn't pick up a phone. I'm so sad. I've been crying all day. And this is a guy that's 6'5", 280 pounds, linebacker from West Point. I mean, he's huge. You wouldn't expect him to be curled up in a ball crying. But the thing is you guys, the lows are really low. They're painfully low. And both of us are like, we didn't have much of a future. We're like, what are we going to do? So usually what happens is I'm on cloud 9 when he's down here. And when he's down here, we kind of always are like this. And that's super helpful. So I recommend co-founders. Go ahead.
Where did you find him? You said he was in Texas.
I found him, take 2 of those if you're an adult. That's a child's dosing. I found him through a brother-in-law who was a headhunter. And back when I was doing Cafe Scribe, he found him. He was coming out of BYU. The schmuck actually came to me and he's like, I'm getting paid $90,000. At the time I had time, enough to pay for him. This was his first job out of BYU, so he got a killer. This is back in 2003. But he's brilliant, and I worked with him for 3 years, and then we sold the company. I worked with him for a couple more years, so I knew him really, really well. The way I would do it if I were to go back and do it again is I would become really good friends with guys in the science building, the computer science building, in the biotech, find people that are science heads. They usually like to get married with someone that likes. Tyler hates what I'm doing. He hates begging for money. That's what I call it, is begging for money. He hates it. It's not his skill. He and I both do the product together, but he codes it. So it's good to have somebody, if you don't code, that can code. Now, we also have coders in the Ukraine that we pay $20 an hour that are killer coders that have PhDs in computer science, but it's good to have a technical side. Good question. Spouse. If you're married, I recommend having a spouse. I think it's great. They are there for your dark days. I had so many times I wanted to give up on every one of these things, and she came back and would push me through those dark days. But if you're married and your spouse is like, I don't know about this, I always go to her and I ask, talk to her about the idea. I get her support. I want her to be bought into it. Because if not, it really makes for a tough haul, guys. If you're going home and you're like, because you're going through days where it's, famine. There's no paycheck, or that, you're trying to make a mortgage. You want someone. One, I recommend having a plan for things. Like, this is how I think I'm going to get to the next 6 months, and then after that 6 months, and you're going to, you try to take it in tranches, because you just never know what's going to happen. but having someone that's supporting behind you, I've seen those who have wives that hate the startup and hate the fact that they're on. That's tougher. And I think that having, your family is the best thing, not the startup. In the end of the day, when you're 80, looking back and having the family is way more fun than having a successful startup.
Do you ever have a hard time balancing your family life with?
Yeah, it depends on this. I mean, my wife right now thinks I'm probably ill-balanced and more. I'm having a lot more fun right now than I did the first startup. First startup, I was like, it was a lot more intense. There's some things you learn. Like, I don't waste time on things that I used to waste time on in the first startup. I'm like, okay, we'll figure that out, but I'm not gonna spend 80 hours putting together a presentation that, So I've been more aware of how to do things. But yeah, it's you figure it out. The first startup, you're usually working 80, 90-hour weeks, and it's going to be imbalanced. And that's where you got to have a strong spouse. The second startup, less crazy hours. The third one I found, it's a lot more balanced.
I feel like the hardest part of a startup, your first startup, is quitting your day job.
Yes.
How did you make that transition from
Honest?
paid every 2 weeks to?
Well, one, I saved up. One, I took a draw out of my home equity. So I had $80,000 that I had in some form of matter. And then I went out and I started. I have a slide on, you have to raise money eventually, and you hope to find somebody that's friends, family, or fools, what I call them, the F and F. You got to find someone that's foolish enough to invest a little bit of you, but it's always, to me, it's that bootstrapping where you're putting money into it, you're running your credit card. I don't recommend the credit card thing. That was really hard. Having $40,000 on a credit card bill sucks. But the equity thing, if you can make it work, but it's still, you kind of have to figure out how to do it. I recommend you can also work on it in the evening, but at some point, if you're going to make it work, you got to leave the job.
So is your end goal for all of your startups to sell it?
Yeah, I usually, I'm kind of a 4-year guy, 4 to 5 years, and then I sell it, is the typical pattern that I'm finding. Zarby's, I'm still involved in it, but Zarby's a little bit different because we raised so much capital. The first one, I owned almost 70% of it still. I raised very little equity. Zarby's, I raised almost 40 million, and so I gave away 51% of the company. And so the control left my hands, and so I can't make the decision to sell that. It's going to be up to the private equity group, but I have a really great relationship with them, so.
That just made me think, when you go into a startup or into a business, do you have the intention to keep it for longer than that? Do you have like a 10, 20-year plan with it? Or?
No. Well, I always feel like, hey, we can build this. Right now with Game It, though, we're looking at listen, this thing's going to start cash flowing. We can make this a lifestyle business. In fact, I had that discussion right before I walked into this room. My co-founder, we just got kicked in the face by a VC. The #1 gaming VC that invested in FanDuel and DraftKings. I was on a call with him this morning, and he's like, awesome game, you guys are doing some really cool stuff. And then punch, kick the face. And he's like, come back to me after you figure this out. And we hung up, and my co-founder calls me up. He's like, that sucked. But that happens. So he's like, well, why don't we just, we're gonna be break even in 2 months, and then let's just kind of cash flow it. We've taken modest salaries. Sometimes, I went a while without taking any salary, so we'll figure it out. But yeah, it's typical. This one is one where I'm sort of like, hey, this could be just kind of like a lifestyle. Typically, I build it up like your dad is a lifestyle business. He can run that thing forever. And that's great. Building it that way has a lot of merit because you're saying, I'm building a business that I want to hold on to and is a legitimate business. A lot of the early stage startups, I've got 15 minutes, you get into a scenario where I'm going to build this. I don't care if I make any revenue. This is an idea. It's Instagram. I mean, Instagram only had 10 employees when they sold for $1 billion. But I say those are far few in between. It's better if you can figure out how do we make our dollars and how do we make a margin. And Zarby's was the same way. I wanted to make a legit business with Zarby's where I'm like, I can pay payroll by what we make by selling at Walmart. And yet, I saw another question. Maybe I was wrong. Oh, go ahead.
Is it you're selling of these, is it tied to kind of like you're losing your obsession with it too?
When you sell it?
When you sell it?
It becomes harder. When you sell, there's a slide I have in here that there's what's the difference between 49% and 51% of when you sell it? It's a million light years difference in your control. I didn't realize that, to be honest. I did this. It was a $10 million raise, and then the next day the guy calls me up. He's like, "Well, we have control now," and I'm like, "What?" And it didn't seem that way when we're going through the kind of the dating phase and all that stuff, but it's a big difference in terms of who you get to hire, when you get to hire. They have every Friday you have a call with them. I mean, don't get me wrong, almost every startup you have a boss. It might be your wife, it might be but you have a boss. Okay, so advisor. My first startup, a big help for mine was an advisor. She was I was going to Berkeley. She was in my class, and she was sort of like the sage of the group. She was about 50, 55. She'd done 3 startups. Her husband was a CTO of Boeing. And I was sitting there. I actually didn't know her well. I just knew her comments were the smartest in the class. And she came up to me at lunch at the very last semester. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm writing my business plan." And she's like, "Can I read it?" I'm like, "Yeah." She read it, and she came up to me afterwards. And she's like, "I'll invest." She's like, "How much? How much are you trying to raise?" And she ended up being an advisor and then a co-founder. She was super helpful, helping me avoid issues. But she was someone I called almost every day. She was a very different. There's advisors you call once a month, and then advisors you call more frequently than that. And she was a big help. And then other entrepreneurs. I'm about once or twice a week I go to lunch with a different entrepreneur. When you go through the dark days, it's nice to have somebody else that's gone through those. One of the CEOs of Energy Solutions went through where he had raised the capital. He went through some really dark days that I had gone through at Zarby's. And we sat down and chuckled about it, over lunch. And it was super. Now he's an investor in Game It. And it's nice to have that network. So a couple more quick things, and then you can go Q&A. Integrity, guys, it's a super small world. I should have experienced, about 10, 15 years ago, I'm off in the middle of the desert in Israel, like in the middle of nowhere. We're at an archaeological dig. My bus, we get off, and I'm standing in line for the bathroom. And I recognize a voice, and I look in front of me, and it's a girl I knew from high school I started in student government with, out in the middle. And I'm like, how do I meet somebody? And this happens to me a lot, like whether it's Disneyland in Japan. It's a small world, and it's smaller here in Salt Lake. So just the way you treat employees, the way you treat co-founders, other people, what comes around goes around. I've seen instances in some of the startups I've been involved with where co-founders get really ticked off. They sue each other over stupid things. Well, guess what? That co-founder is going to have a hard time finding another co-founder in the next gig. And like Tom had said, I can't find a real job, so I have to keep on coming up with ideas. Most of these guys that get involved in these startups have to come up with their next idea. So it's a small world. Be careful how you treat others. And then this was a surprising one for me. When they were going to invest the $10 million, they were like, "We're going to do a background check." So I gave them the people that invest in my other companies. Well, what I didn't know is these guys are all Harvard, Stanford, Wharton guys that have tentacles everywhere. They were calling my neighbors who had graduated from these, and I didn't know until like a little while. I was walking down in my church. I was walking down the hall, and some guy comes up and he's like, "Dude, I just got called by Catterton, and they were asking me about what kind of person you were." I'm like, "Seriously? That's crazy weird." But they do that because they're about to write a $10 million check, and they value, every cent of that is very important. So just watch where you put on Facebook and Instagram because they're going to look at it. So a few last fast tips. How to make the stars align. I found those 3 things that I just talked about help the stars align. Sometimes it just comes down to timing. After I sold my company, Follett came to me and they said, it was in 2008, and then they wanted to do a 90-day close. I got them to a 60-day close. Right after we closed, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. The whole world fell apart. And the CEO of Follett came to me and said, "You know what? Had we waited a couple more months, we would not have done this deal." And so you never know what's going to affect the outcome. The 4951 I talked about, great legal advice. There's some great firms here. I'm always happy to introduce you to guys that I know. That can be really helpful because they can help you avoid the whole 49% thing in your negotiations. Bootstrap is the way I would suggest doing it if you can. Sometimes you have to work 2 jobs, one in the evening on Saturdays and one until you get it where you feel like it's comfortable. And then the Friends, Family, and Fools, then Angel Network. Then you got the VCs, which they're a little more aggressive. I think VC is a misnomer. It should just be capitalists. They don't do venture. they really want you to have this well thought out nowadays. They want it be. I thought that it were a little venture. I got back into this venture thing. I'm going out and they're like, okay, where's your revenue? Where's your margin? They don't. It's really hard to find the guy that's gonna give $1 million to the Instagram idea. It's really hard to find that. And then the private equity guys, you're further along. You're doing 2 to 3 million in revenue, maybe 10 million in revenue. They want a bigger chunk of the cap, and they do these crazy things where it's participating preferred capital, where they get way more money in the end. But you need them. I usually always do startups that need them. These are 3 of my favorite books. The first one is The Method Method. Is a friend of mine who wrote that. His name is Eric Ryan. He did the Method soap. If you want to know what consumer goods and how to start a consumer goods company, he talked about how he started mixing this stuff in his kitchen sink, and then he got it into Target. It's a great book. 0 to 1 is the founder of PayPal. That also gives you a glimpse of how painful the ups and downs can be, and then how will you measure your life is a good example of what Don't go running for the millions, because in the end of the, if you're just focused on the money, you're focused on the wrong thing. Money's, some people say it's a motivator. For me, what gets me up in the day is what the value I'm bringing to the world. And then that's my favorite quote by Shakespeare. If you don't try, you're going to lose out. You have to at least try. So, questions. I think we've got 5-10 minutes.
So when you sell your companies, how do you find the people to sell them to?
Well, with 1440, the day I started it, I started calling people, to be totally candid. I got a friend of mine a job at Google because I knew some Google guys, and so I started networking with him. He got me presenting in front of Google, and so Google started becoming, this is before Google had Google Books or any of this. This is way back when. And so that's something where I started building those relationships with Google the day I started it. And then I came down to BYU, met the BYU bookstore guy, and he introduced me to Follett. And within a couple days, I was talking to people that I knew would be future acquirers of the company. With Zarbee's, I tried that method, didn't work out so well. They really, consumer goods, they want you to be doing $50 million in revenue and plus before they're like, this is a legitimate business. So at the very beginning, I met with the CMO of Johnson & Johnson and the head of products at Johnson & Johnson thinking, oh, we're doing $1 million, we're pretty sweet. They weren't interested. They want something doing 50 million plus with margins of 60%. Same with Method. Like he tried the same kind of approach, and really what he found is he had to create a legitimate business. I actually had my first offer to buy Gameit last week from a company in Finland. He offered me a horrible offer, and I just said I'd rather run it to the ground than get that. So right now I'm not really obsessed about selling it. I'm more focused on let's build something of value. Good question. Can I throw this to you?
Oh, yeah.
So at what point do you decide that your startup or your baby is just coming, just give it up? It's not
Oh, I was having those feelings in December with Gameit. I was like, we are screwed. This is really bad. I was pretty depressed. It's hard to know. You have to kind of, those are the times when I go to my wife and I'm like, honey, this is not working out so well. And you kind of get a gauge of, should I keep on going? That was for me. But it's hard. Every one of them is different. I know some guys that have run it too long and they've gone into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and really put themselves at a bad position and their family at a bad position. I wouldn't recommend that either, but it's, for me, it's sort of, I look at them, I'm like, you are certifiably crazy. I know I'm crazy, but I don't know if I'm certified. Oh, sorry.
Have you walked away from projects that haven't worked out?
I've invested in projects that haven't worked out. Nothing personal. I think it was Mark asked me, he said, when was your first one? And I decided to do 1440. Part of I saw a big pain point, but I had a friend of mine who ended up being my co-founder. He and I were both product managers at a company here in Provo, and he walked in after we got yelled at by the CEO, and I owned 0.00005% of the company, and I reported to the CEO, but he came in and he's like, my co-founder's like, I'm done. I'm going to go do your business plan. If you want to join me, come join me. And that's how it got me motivated. wait, I'm sorry, what was your question? I lost track. That's my ADD.
Walking away from a project, and if your individual projects you've walked, have you walked
Oh, I walked away. Yeah, so I've walked away from like small percentages in these companies that I was part of, but I've invested in companies that were doing 50 million and went bankrupt, and it's painful. And then so I don't know, but I haven't actually run one where I've walked away from it yet. Other questions, Mark?
Okay, you've been here in Salt Lake, Utah, and California. What are there differences in climate there from it?
Yeah. Okay, I've always raised my money from outside of Utah, except for my friends, families, and fools. It's way easier to raise money in San Francisco for a startup. In consumer goods, New York and San Francisco and LA are all better consumer goods places for like Zarbies. For SaaS-based software as a service models, Utah's prime. We've got a boatload of enterprise software as a service companies, thanks to Josh James and some other companies like I saw a guy from Qualtrics or something like that walk in. Consumer-facing apps like mine, they don't like it, they don't get it, they think I'm crazy. And so Utah's harder for that. It is getting better overall, but it's still hard. I think the entrepreneur spirit is thriving here compared to even 2003. Totally different. Here at UVU, at BYU, University of Utah, I see the entrepreneurs jumping out doing stuff that I wouldn't have dared to do. And I think it's exciting, it's really fun. The call I had today was the first call where the guy didn't faze him that we were in Salt Lake. He's like, my best friend is Pat O'Brien from Overstock. And he's like, I love Utah and I love investing in this, entrepreneurs there. He's like, I would totally do it. That is the first time I've had a lot of guys in the Bay Area. They're getting more comfortable investing here, but it's still hard. So.
Do you feel like your MBA helped you out quite a bit?
It was my security blanket. I would do it again. It was worth the 140 grand. For me, I needed that. Not everybody needs it. For me, it was sort of like it opened more doors for me and opened up a whole different Rolodex of individuals I could call on. It also, the security blanket I needed is I could do a P&L. Now I have another guy that does a way better P&L when I need to do a P&L or a pro forma because I'm not a total financial expert. But at least I know where to say, this is it, there's an issue here, I can look through it. And so it was my security blanket. I would do it again. It also gave me my idea for my first startup. So go ahead.
How have you transitioned from doing one business to doing another business? Like, has it been pretty similar, the processes?
Yeah, it's sort of like a pregnancy thing. For 8 months, I usually incubate it in my head. And I'm talking with a co-founder. I'm trying to find I actually didn't immediately call Tyler because he's in Texas. And I'm like, I want someone I can go in and see. This has actually turned out way better. I love having him in Texas. But not everybody would agree with that. But I usually incubate the idea. And then I try to launch it. So we actually started coding, launched it, and got it out there before I totally left Zarbies. It's not always the case. Actually, with Zarbies, my Zarbies investment, I was still at Follett, and I made that investment, and then I made the commitment to be CEO. So it's kind of been something where I watch something for 6 to 8 months, and then I commit completely. But I always find that unless you're willing to commit completely, and that helps offset some of the risk, you start seeing indicators of success. I raised $1.5 million or $1.6 million into Gameit. I thought we had all these indicators of success, so I go out and I got all the people that invested in my last 2 startups to invest in this. And I'm like, yeah. I literally took $500,000, put it in the room, and torched it, guys. I really made a bad mistake. I just put a flamethrower to $500,000 and torched it. That's why we were both crying in December. So I thought I had success and I didn't, and so we had to retool. Go ahead.
You said you've invested in some companies.
Yeah.
How has that gone? Would you think bad?
Really bad. I'm never going to do it. I'm not going to say I'm never going to do it. I'm going to be much more, the ones that have been, I've invested between people that I know and they've gone bad, and that's hard. And that's why I'm completely OCD about trying to return the individual's capital. I've also heavily invested in Gameit. It's not just outside investors. In Zarbies, I'm the 3rd largest investor still. I'm super heavy committed into it personally. So if I lose, they lose. If they lose, I lose. So, but I'm straying away from investing outside because it's really not been successful. To me, it's not been successful. And I've invested in companies that are doing really well, and it's still not been successful. So actually, the one success I've had is, who's heard of TechCrunch? Nobody? Oh, there's a thing called TechCrunch, which is a blog for technology. It's great. If you're going to technology, I recommend reading it a lot. They have a Crunch fund, and I invested in that, and that's done well. But they invested in Vine and Twitter and Snapchat, and it just happened to do well. Other questions? One more?
You said that you found your programmers, or you have programmers in the Ukraine. Where do you find these, is there
Craigslist. I can give you, I can tell you my email and I can introduce you to them. I posted on Craigslist and suddenly we got responses from the Ukraine. And I was like hesitant. They can't speak a lick of English, but they can type it well. And you don't want to hire a Russian in Ukraine. We went through that. They fight. They hate each other. So just go with one country over two. They're phenomenal and they're super bright. And I would recommend, and no offense, but I've gone through India, China, Philippines. Ukraine has been by far the best. They're the most creative and hardworking, and they're cheaper. Any other questions? Is that it?
Hey,
All right.
thanks, everybody.